Next up, a great American story and a great American. Michael Caputo is someone I've known for a long time, and he's got a great American story. He's got a wonderful family. He has had extraordinary professional success, and he's also done something that many people are called on to do, but not as many do it as elegantly as Michael has. He's taken his personal and professional challenges, and he's fused them together and into an opportunity to help not just himself, but the country. Michael has been a long time operative in the Republican Party, as well as in policy, cares about his party and about the country, worked with President Trump and a lot of people in MAHA, but long before Donald Trump was in the political scene, Michael was. He's also dealt with an extraordinary health challenge during a difficult time for him. And Michael Caputo joins us now to talk about it all. Michael, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's great to be with you.
Talk first, just to give people who don't know you, about your political resume. How did you start in politics? What have you done in politics and in government over the course of your career?
Well, I started in the United States Army. I kind of grew up in a rural, sometimes trailer park environment, and Army was something we had to do to be able to go to college. And after I left the infantry and went into the university, I interned with Congressman Jack Kemp, who was my congressman, as well as my quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. I grew up in Buffalo, and that I just took off from there. I went to work for the Reagan in '84 on the campaign, just as a kind of guy on the ground, opening chairs up. I went on to work in Jack Kemp's presidential campaign in '88. Went into George H.W. Bush's campaign in '92. By then, I had started specializing in media relations. When we lost in '92 to Bill Clinton, I took an assignment, a USAID assignment in Russia, where I was in charge of the formation of the new democratic election system in Russia, and worked there probably for nigh on 7 years. Came back from Russia and got back into just opening my own PR firm. I was involved in the private sector. And then along came Donald Trump. I knew Donald Trump for many years. At the 1988 Republican convention in New Orleans, I was a driver in the motor pool, and I was assigned to a visitor named Donald Trump. And I drove him around for a couple of days while he was there and just stayed in touch with him. When he was thinking about running for governor in New York in 2013, 2014, I ran that operation. When he wanted to buy the Buffalo Bills, my hometown team, I was helping him out with that. And then, of course, I joined the 2016 campaign, worked at the convention, and then stayed out of the administration, ran my own PR firm still. But then when the nation was struck by COVID, the president asked me to come and be Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at HHS. As you remember, comms were a mess. And I was trying to handle that. Very highly stressful environment. But I think I should step back for a second and remind folks that because the Clinton administration sent me to Russia to meddle in their elections, I became very sexy to Robert Mueller, because I think I might have been at the time the only person before Robert Witkoff to know both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Putin was just a deputy mayor of St. Petersburg when I met him, not a nice guy. And so I went on to, after going through Russiagate, they took everything, all of our savings, or legal fees. I was working in the HHS operation. Such stressful stuff. I felt
how much before we'll do the cancer in a sec. How much did you spend in legal fees?
About $500,000.
Yeah. So you and your family, again, as you said, early associated with President Trump, knew him, and then came into the government and had to deal with being investigated. Were you ever charged with anything?
Oh, no. But it's a long story, but it never stopped. I mean, they're still doing it now.
Yeah.
The fact is, if you're a friend of Donald Trump, you're vulnerable.
Yeah. So you've dealt with cancellation. You've dealt with dealing in the Department of Health and Human Services during COVID. And then in the midst of dealing with those things, in the aftermath of those things, tell us your cancer story.
Well, since I had to coordinate all the communications, it meant I had to coordinate all the doctors, Anthony Fauci, Robert Redfield, all the doctors who were on TV, because nobody wanted to hear from Michael Caputo, who had no idea about medicine and science. They wanted to hear from the doctors. I was very busy making sure they could communicate. And so I had them come to my office quite often to discuss the schedule for the next day. one day, Robert Redfield of the CDC, he was sitting next to me, and I turned my head. I was 300 pounds, 100 pounds more heavy than I am now. And I turned my head, and he poked me in the neck, and he said, "Michael, what's that?" I had the turtleneck of fat, and my lymph node was poking out hard as a rock. And he said, "Michael, you got to go to the hospital right now." So they threw me in a car. I went to the NIH, where I was met by the Surgeon in Chief of the United States and the head of the National Cancer Institute. Apparently they had gotten a call from somebody in the White House saying, "My guy's coming. You better figure out what's going on." And 3 hours later, they had removed my lymph node. And I left that night and went back to my apartment. As I left, because my family was back in Buffalo, I was working in, the quarantine section of Washington. You don't remember how that was. And so when I left, I said goodbye to the doctors, and I said, "I guess I'll hear from you in a week or so." They said, "No, we're not allowed to go home until we know the answer." And they called me after later that night and told me I had head and neck cancer, and that it had likely gone to my brain. And the entire world crashed around me. You can imagine.
Yeah.
I didn't handle it well. I blamed the world for it. It's a stress-driven cancer, and I blamed everyone but myself for the stress.
Yeah.
And then I went into quarantine from my family. My daughters would sit outside my bedroom with their backs to the door and read to me. And after they went to bed, I would open the door, and there would be their artwork. They were 5 and 7, and it really became so bad. It wasn't just the cancer, because head and neck cancer was throat cancer. It's one of the easiest to cure, but it's one of the most difficult to treat, because it's the intersection of your breath and your swallow and your voice, and the treatments are quite brutal. It's chemotherapy and 35 doses of radiation to your head, one every day.
The stories, you and I were in touch during that period where you were isolated from your girls while you were dealing with this, and it's heartbreaking moments, and the difficulties. You said it's not the most dangerous cancer, but it's tough to deal with. Talk about how you came through it.
Well, at one point, because the media was not being kind to me. They weren't being kind to anyone around Trump. And when I fell ill, they were just brutalizing me. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Politico, terrible people, terrible stories. And one day I talked to the president. He said, "Just stop reading this stuff. Stop answering emails. Stop attending meetings." Because I was still assistant secretary. He says, you better take care of yourself. So I stopped paying attention. But it was brutal. And right before Thanksgiving 2020, I decided to die. I decided to let it take me. I stopped eating and drinking. Nobody knew, because I was quarantined. And then my wife figured it out. And she grabbed me up and took me to the hospital, a great hospital in Buffalo that was treating me. And Roswell Park, by the way, a leading cancer hospital, luckily in Buffalo. And I went in there, and the nurses later told me that I was trying to die. It was very clear I hadn't had water or food for days.
How many days?
And Michael? Of course, about 4. And it isn't a lot for a lot of people, but it was a lot for a person falling fast.
Yeah.
And the nurses said, well, she was so kind. She said, "You're trying to die." But you can't die when they're feeding you through your arm, And so I was recovering. I came out of there after a very, very profound experience, deciding that I was going to live, right? And that was Thanksgiving 20. At the end of February, the doctors called me in, and they said, "Michael, we expected to have some kind of news that we had a next step in your treatment, but we can't find cancer anywhere in your body." And, when you have cancer of the throat and it gets into your lymph node, you have to assume it's 4 inches from your brain. The lymphatic fluid has taken it to your brain fairly quickly. And in fact, by the way, they don't, when it's in your lymph node, they don't take it out, because you can poke it, and then it's in your lymphatic fluid. It goes through your whole body. I have a PR person's understanding of this, but because I found out later, they were amazed. that it didn't go to my brain.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
Because the president sent me to the NIH, and the surgeon in chief of the United States was doing my surgery, and the number 2 on the surgery was the head of the National Cancer Institute. I was like I was assaulted, Yeah. And here I had come from a trailer park, and but they don't take out your lymph node because it could go, if they make a mistake, you're done. But he knew how to do it, this fellow, and he took it out. And the folks at Roswell told me the reason why it didn't go to my brain is because immediately they took out the lymph node. That's the only reason I'm alive today.
So through a combination of great care and luck and good fortune and Lord, you're cancer-free now, right?
I am complete. I got throat cancer is a little different. They say no evidence of disease. People who have terrible lung and other cancers, they call it remission because they kind of expect it to come back. It's a little different in throat cancer. And so I'm disease-free. And I have been since February of 21. It shocked me.
Yeah. And you sound and look great. And you've had the good fortune of spending time with some of the people in our country now who, as part of President Trump's MAHA movement, are really focused on cancer and beating cancer. Yeah. That includes the Secretary Kennedy, includes Dr. Oz. So talk about your vision for the MAHA movement as it pertains to cancer.
Well, you can imagine, as a lifelong Republican and many years of support for Donald Trump, I did not want to like Robert Kennedy. He had said some mean things, but after he endorsed, one of the leaders of the campaign said to me, well, why don't you go and help him? He wants to be involved in the health department. Maybe he wants to be HHS secretary. You're the only one. I was one of the guys on the policy group, and I was doing health policy. They said, go and talk to him. You've been to HHS. You can tell him about, maybe he wants to start like an Operation Warp Speed. Maybe he wants to be secretary. Maybe he wants to be an assistant to the president. He didn't know. And so I actually moved in with Bobby Kennedy and his wife, Cheryl. They had rented Dr. Oz's house in Palm Beach to be close to Mar-a-Lago and go to meetings. And I moved in with them for several days. It was a profound experience for me because I went in there thinking, boy, I'm not going to like this guy. And within a day, I understood that he was someone to really be admired. The Bobby Kennedy is unique in Washington, and that makes it difficult for Bobby. I discovered one of the things that made me like him is he's physically unable to lie. And honestly, we were talking about things where I was saying, well, I'll say it this way. He says, Michael, I can't do that. I don't lie. Yeah. And that's a wonderful thing for America. Yeah. But it's terrible for Bobby Kennedy.
There's an innocence about him, a sense of wonder about the world that, as you said, keeps him from feeling he can lie. And as you also said, makes him a PR handler's nightmare.
It is, but at the same time, he had conversations with me and he ended up landing on HHS secretary, but he's like, how do I impact children? He says the chronic disease problem for the children of America is he says it keeps him up at night. And he wakes up every morning praying that he can do something. And I realized he wasn't lying to me. And so we talked about it. And it's interesting because, Dr. Oz has a house on the beach there in Palm Beach, like 10 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms. And it was like, I don't know, what do you call it? Big Brother, that TV show? Because all of Bobby's people are there, a bunch of doctors, they each have a bedroom. It's like Big Brother with hippies, And it was just a really wonderful experience. And I was allergic to chemo. It was a terrible experience. I went into it blew out my hearing. I have what some doctors tell me is a 9 or a 10 out of 10 tinnitus. It changes your life completely. Yeah. But one thing it does is it doesn't let you sleep. And so I wake up every day at 4 a.m. I've adjusted my life to deal with that. But one of the things I had to do on Palm Beach was get up and go downstairs because I'm not going to lay in bed and stare at the ceiling. So I'm in Bobby's rental house. I'm down at the table looking out at the ocean, having a coffee by myself before sunrise. And the next person to get up, of course, is Bobby, because he's an early riser. And we would talk for a little while. But each of the doctors and the hippies would get up and come down, and I'd be at the table like I've been there all night. And one day, one of the guys said to me, he got up. He wasn't one of the early risers. And And he came down. Clearly, he had gotten up to talk to me. He said, Michael, what is wrong? I said, what do you mean? He says, you're yellow. He's like, there's something wrong. What is wrong? Well, for 7 months, I was pretty sure my cancer was back. I had believed that somehow or another, because of my Google, medical degree, I believed that my throat cancer had gone to my prostate, and it turned, it was going bad. And I didn't want to go through cancer treatments again, so I didn't tell anyone. And I was just feeling worse and worse. And before I went to Bobby's house, my wife pulled me aside and she said, what is wrong with you? You're falling apart. And I told her, I said, I think my cancer is back. She said, well, what are you doing? What do you do? I mean, have you seen a doctor? I said, no, I don't want to. And she said, do something for me. So she had me sign up for this website where you pay a bunch of money and they do 100 different blood tests on you. They actually take like a gallon, I signed up for it, and then I got in the car and I went to Bobby's house. And then 4 days later, this fellow wakes up and comes down to the table. He says, what's wrong with you? And as a doctor, and I said, I think my cancer is back. And he said, what are you doing about it? And I said, nothing. I just really want it to take me. I can't do it again. And he said, don't do that. He said, do something. What are you doing? I said, did you tell your wife? I said, I told her, Sunday. And he said, what did you do? And I said, I signed up for this website, right? And Mark, it's funny. He looked at me and said, what's the name of the website? I said, functionhealth.com. And he said, that's my website. It was Dr. Mark Hyman.
Yeah.
And Dr. Hyman said, did you take your blood test yet? I said, no. He said, stand by. And he texted somebody. And I got my blood test that day in Palm Beach.
And what was the diagnosis?
Well, I'll tell you. I went home because Bobby was later that day picked for HHS, and I said goodbye so he could celebrate with his people. And I went home, and Mark called me 3-4 days later. No, a couple days later. And he said, Michael, I didn't give you a cancer panel, but it looks to me like you got a kidney stone the size of Jupiter. He said, because I don't know, blood in my urine or whatever, the way and he said, got to get a scan. He hooked me up with a scan. Sure enough, I had a nearly 2 centimeter kidney stone. And it was stuck in my kidney. And if I had sat there with my Google MD and thought it was cancer, I might have had a failed kidney and really had a problem. I had surgery during the inauguration, and I'm fine. It wasn't cancer, Mark. It was a kidney stone.
Which is about the most painful thing out there, having had one, I can say, in your sense, bigger than mine was. Tell us about your vision now for MAHA and for cancer. What are they doing? What should they be doing? How much hope should people have about this administration's ability, not just for kids, but for everybody fighting cancer?
Yeah, hope is the key, right? Because what happened to me is I lost it. I went through, and I would go every day waiting in the waiting room to go get my head blasted with radiation. And there were these 3 children there that were there every day. When I went there, they were there, and they were sitting in chairs with me. 3-4 days later, they were in gurneys. A week after that, they were unresponsive to me. And when I said hello, because I remember their names.
Yeah.
And then they didn't show up again. And I knew they had died. And I thought to myself, after my allergy to chemo, I thought, first of all, these children should not be getting cancer. They're too darn young. And by the way, what if they're allergic to chemo? The toxins they put in your body to heal you, I have to deal with this for 20 years. They'd have to deal with it for 70. It's unbearable. These poor kids. And Bobby got me focused on childhood cancer. And I believe the administration through MAHA is absolutely focused on this troubling trend that cancer is increasingly striking younger and younger people. And Bobby and the president are completely focused on young people in this first stage of MAHA. They're attacking childhood chronic disease, and cancer is the #1 chronic disease killer of children. These early onset cancers are growing at a rate that is frightening doctors. And it's growing at a rate that's incomparable to any other nation in the world. So what I believe, because you can imagine, I talk to people in the administration, and I'm very interested in this because I believe MAHA cancer can change everything. Chemotherapy, the chemo that they gave to me hasn't been really changed since 1890. You believe that? 1890. Yeah. And they're treating children with ancient medicines when there are other ways to treat them. We need to discover them. But more importantly, you see the president and his team very focused on artificial intelligence. And there's a reason for this in the health industry, in public health. And in childhood cancer, you can use AI to, number one, using the data we have buckets and buckets of data over history, and you can put it into AI, and within half an hour, you can have answers to what is causing some of this. And you can work with children who have the disease to figure out the environmental factors. Maybe it's pesticides, maybe it's food, as what's driving this cancer. With artificial intelligence and pushing diagnosis and research into younger ages, we have a spike in cancer in 20 and 30-year-olds. We know that a lot of that came from their childhood. And also, we don't discover it because, Mark, nobody even asks you about cancer at the doctor until you're 40. Right? It made to make it younger. I believe that the president and Bobby Kennedy are completely focused on this. And by the way, Jay Bhattacharya, an incredible, incredible doctor. And I've talked to these fellows. They all agree that the causes of cancer in childhood are poorly understood. And there is absolutely something we can do about it. I'm talking because, I got healed by... I was cured by Roswell Park, and I went to Moffitt in Tampa to be healed. And then I went everywhere in the nation trying to find an answer to my tinnitus. So I've talked to everyone. Yeah. And there are places like City of Hope that are actually pretty far along. The City of Hope in LA, they're actually very far along in applying artificial intelligence in diagnosis and research. And, we're going to be able to find the environmental causes of cancer in children. Artificial intelligence will break this whole logjam for us.
Michael, finally, tell folks who will say, well, Michael Caputo was dealt with crushing medical news and gave up. Tell folks what they should take from your lesson about whether if they're got a cancer diagnosis or some other really tough diagnosis, how they should react to it.
I have to tell you, if you're not a person of faith, then lean into your family. I tell my friends, I prayed for boys. I got none. I have all daughters. And girls take care of their dads, right? But in addition to that, and I don't really want to be preachy about it, but I was shocked by the no evidence of disease diagnosis. I lived across the street from my parish, and my Catholic parish, I could not go to church. The Catholic priest would send the host over to me for Eucharist during the day, and I cured myself with God. But I can tell you, my recovery, I was in a bad situation. Antifa was outside my house. They were throwing things at my windows at night to try and keep me awake as I was in recovery. And so my wife and I and my children, we moved to Florida because I wanted to go to church and I couldn't, right? And we moved to a little town called Ave Maria. It's in the Everglades in Florida, where the founder of Domino's had built a beautiful cathedral, and now there's 11,000 Catholics here. And so I showed up, and I really didn't get out of bed here for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then when I did, I realized that going to Mass wasn't enough. I'm actually in a master's program for theology at Ave Maria University. I know people think that's shocking, considering what a smash-mouth politician I've been. Really, in the end, there is only one way to be healed, and it's your faith. It really is. And your family can get you there. But I gave up. I really did. But
yeah, Michael has not talked much about this, and we've just scratched the surface, but it's a great American story. Every cancer struggle is in some ways the same, but everyone's different. And very few people have to fight for their lives and deal with cancer while they're also being investigated by a special counsel and dealing with attempts to cancel. So, Michael, it's a great story and a brave story, and it's testament not to the support of your family, but also to your extraordinary struggle and determination. And I couldn't be happier to see you looking so great.
Content. I want to thank you for all the cancer content that you put out there. You didn't have to do that. I can tell you, a lot of us with cancer and post-cancer are watching.
Appreciate it. That's a show I do called Cancer Decoded with Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who owns Los Angeles Times and is one of the most renowned cancer experts in the country. And I'm just so honored to be partnered with him on that program and have learned so much about struggles like yours. And as I said, all the struggles, all the challenges are the same in some ways, but everyone's unique, and yours is a pretty special story. And Michael, we're so grateful to you for sharing it.
Thank you, Mark.
That is it for today's episode. Grateful to you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and download Next Up wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube and pretty much everywhere else. Grateful to you for being a Nexter. Please keep watching so you always know what's coming next up.